Welcome to Rumor Flies, everyone. I am Josh.
I'm Ryan.
Wow, really disappointed over there.
I'm
Greg.
I'm very tired.
We are here with our two-parter for the season finale. And as you guys can probably tell from the title of the episode, it's about vaccinations and anti-vaxxers and things of that sort. So we wanted to apologize upfront again that this isn't going to be on your normal Monday. But, this is one that is going to cause a lot. It's been a lot of legwork on our end, more so than normal, because we really want to nail this down and get this right. And today, the first part of this two-parter is more going to be the history of how we came to where we are as far as vaccines and anti-vaxxers and things like that. And then the second parter, well, you'll just have to stay tuned to see what it's about.
Yeah, well, no, we can tell them up front. I mean, this is going to be a lot of talking about how this movement has been throughout, even actually it started before vaccines even started. But not only that, we will be covering the key players. This is more of like the optics of the movement and how it became so popular. Not only that, we will be addressing all of the concerns, or as many as we can find wherever we can, even up to like the cutting edge today issues of the anti-vaccination movement in the second episode. But this one, we just kind of want to give an idea of how this thought virus spreads pretty much. And I say that, I should have said it a little bit more lightly, because we want to tell you this. We are not trying to punch down on most of the people that are a part of the anti-vaccination movements. I think when we were planning this, we thought a lot about, like, the comparison was the Patriots episode, right? We're attacking the people running the grift. We are understanding that some of these people are victims, Yeah, it is not most people's fault. They are mainly a lot of concerned parents. I'll say that much. Now, where they're being led by people who might have ulterior motives, that's a different story. Also, we want to say that as awkward as this is, we've had this plan since we were planning the start of the season. And this is just timing. An unfortunate time for this to be happening. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
I'm going to be taking a very... not too punch down once again view at this, but I'm also going to be in a very fuck it type of mannerism through this episode.
I think it's fair to say that, Ryan, you are, I think all of us are, relatively hostile to the anti-vax movement.
Yeah. But don't think that I'm being laissez-faire right now when I talk about the immense amount of child death in this episode that is going to be brought up. It is more of a coping mechanism for the months of research that we have been collectively doing right now. And let's normalize a little bit before we actually jump in. Greg, do you have any announcements or what we should do? We still have a threadless shop, right? That's still a thing, huh?
Yeah, we got a threadless shop that's linked in the show notes and on the Rumor Mill page on Facebook. You should all be on that. It's a lot of fun. And we have our Patreon, of course. Thank you all so much for donating. I announced this before, but we are not going to be charging for the last two episodes. There's also going to be a little reduction in the Patreon content, but regardless, we will not be charging y'all. We understand that everyone's got bills to pay. Please, thank you for all your donations so far. You've been amazing.
Hey, the upside is we'll probably be slapping out some bonus content to everyone. So enjoy that.
Exactly.
Yeah, just like how Josh wasn't there for the last episode. Interesting.
All right. You know what? Difficult times.
Your baby can wait, Josh, okay? All right, so without further ado, would you like to hear my first mostly scripted segment for this podcast?
Hell yeah.
All right, and you guys feel free to jump in at any point you want. There actually might be some participation, too. Now, I'm going to be covering.
Do we have to raise our hands?
Yes, you have to raise your hands, even though we don't have video on right now.
Yes. I guess we should mention that we are social distancing and not recording this all together.
Put a timestamp on that one right there.
Actually, no. See, we didn't need to socially distance because all three of us actually bunk up together. We take this show very seriously. And we all moved in.
No, we kiss at the end of each episode. Everybody knows that.
We are Italians, I mean.
So
give me my pasta.
Give me my pasta.
All right, let's jump in because this is going to get depressing.
Yep.
I got a little forward going for us. In 2019, the United States alone recorded over 1,200 measles cases across 12 outbreaks, the highest recorded number of cases since 1992. In 2016 and 17, over 250 cases of mumps were reported in the affluent region around Harvard University in Massachusetts, where previous years the average was around 10 cases. In 1941, the U.S. reported 222,000 cases of whooping cough, a potentially fatal disease for infants. In 1963, the U.S. reported 17,000 cases of whooping cough, so a nice decline. By 1965, the number of whooping cough cases dropped to just under 8,000. However, in 2014, the number had jumped back up to 32,000 cases and still rising, baby. The number of currently unvaccinated people in the United States is 4 times that of 2009. Why is this?
Misinformation.
Yeah, that's pretty much the answer. Yep, you got that. All right, we're done with the episode. I thought I would have to read
All right,
this whole
guys,
goddamn
thanks
thing.
for listening to Rumor Flies. We're
Let's wrap it up.
rumorfliespodcast.com at Rumor Flies.
There are dozens of explainable and still not yet understood driving forces, both simple and extremely complex factors, and both understandably reasonable and incoherently malicious justifications for this phenomenon. But none of it's new. A good approach to figuring this mess out is to look at the past receipts. I'm presenting a very abbreviated yet hopefully nuanced history of vaccines and the anti-vax movement sentiment. And little quick note right there. I know that if anybody here is listening and they happen to be vaccine aversive, I know that anti-vax is somehow a derogatory term. I am going to keep saying it, but it's not meant to take a jab at you right now, unless you are Andrew Wakefield. It is meant to be a...
In which case, stabby, stab, stab, stab.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is meant to be me saying things faster than the PC terminology. Oh my God. Oh my God, I've turned into, oh no. Okay, so.
You're one of those people, Ryan.
Ryan's like, dude, I want to finish this thought or not.
This will better help understand the complexities of this unfortunate present conflict. I went into this a jaded and honestly condescending prick concerning all anti-vax proponents. Over time, I became angry at the habitual nature of our species, reasonably sympathetic to some of those that I vehemently disagree with, hopeless to the depths of malevolent deception humans are capable of, and I was also imbued with a sense of pride for the persistence of humanity. All at the same time. I've had a weird month. I think we all have, but just reading this stuff up was particularly weird. I'll be focusing on as much of the vaccine/anti-vaccine history as possible, but I will be focusing heavily on the timeline of smallpox in the United States because, well, I'm American and can relate most to American issues. I think that you guys will justify that too, right?
Yes, and smallpox is a good foundation for starting this episode because that was the one that really kicked off the anti-vax movement.
Yeah, because the OG vaccine came from it. No spoilers right
Yes.
there, but here we go.
Yes.
And lastly, although I am one that believes all things are political to some degree, vaccines are not a political issue at heart, but it certainly has become politicized. Much like the temperance movement, though, the lines are not cut and dry. There are many across the political spectrum pushing scientific and humane responsibility. Then there are many pushing dangerous misinformation, whether from a place of misguided concern or selfish profit motives. Ultimately, this is the story of an ongoing battle that one participant doesn't even know is happening, but still fights valiantly, and the hope that humans can use their own resilience, brilliance, and cooperation to continue to live another day and argue about much less important and objectively dumber shit. During this summation, I will sound like both an authoritarian communist, and at other times, I will sound like a don't step on Sneck brand of libertarian. I assure you that I am neither. I just wanted to get all that stuff out the way. This is not hitting at any side of the spectrum right now because this literally is a bipartisan issue. Let's just say it that way.
I would say nonpartisan. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say nonpartisan. That's a much better term, Greg. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually better. Yeah, well done, Greg.
I sourced most of this segment from the books Between Hope and Fear by Michael Kinch, The Panic Virus by Seth Nukin, Pox by Michael Wilrich, Bad Advice by Paul Offit, and Deadly Choices by Paul Offit. I did some reading. So, let's jump in. Smallpox, more formally known as variola major or minor, has a 7 to 17 day incubation period, with symptoms beginning around day 12. After the initial fever, aches, and nausea kick in, Red rashes form in the mouth and throat. Then they burst. All down the throat. Sounds delicious. Once the mouth sores have subsided, rashes start to form in the skin, eventually covering the whole body. These rashes grow into bumps called pustules that continue to grow until bursting. So, covered in pus. Sounds wonderful. I know I'm doing all this lovely creative language right now, but it is what it is. If the victim has not started to recover or die yet, eventually they start bleeding out the mouth, nose, eyes, and pretty much every other orifice, followed by death. In any other occasion, I wouldn't recommend this, but looking up an image of a smallpox victim will give you a clear idea of how horrifying this disease can be. Smallpox has killed an estimated 300 to 500 million throughout recorded history.
Ew.
And let's spot focus. Just one little case study. In Iceland in 1241, before vaccines were a thing, 20,000 of the 70,000 in the country died from a smallpox outbreak.
Whoa.
Yep.
That's, what, 2 out of every 7 people?
That's roughly 2/7, yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, so in perspective, if you have a family of 4, one of you is going to die.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And Iceland's a pretty small island as it is. They did not do too well through that one. Okay. The first practice against smallpox is believed to have began around 2,000 years ago, around the region of China where people would insufflate ground up smallpox scabs. And by insufflate, I mean they would literally snort smallpox scabs. Pretty fucking gross, right? This would give them a mild sickness in most cases, though, then grant them immunity to any future severe cases of smallpox. Awesome. Although this is speculated to be around 2,000 years ago, the first official record of this practice occurred in India around 800 CE. So that's pretty crazy that even that long ago, somebody had some idea of how to defend against this thing. Because smallpox was rampant for a very long time.
Literally over 1,000 years ago.
Yep.
And that is it's a very barbaric way, but that's how the vaccine works. They give you a piece of the virus, your body becomes immune to it, then you can't catch it. Really simple, but yeah, it works.
Yeah. The Silk Road led the Ottomans to adopting insufflation and eventually developing a variant where the lymph was placed under a cut piece of skin. Thus began something called variolation. And when I say lymph, I mean like it's this like stuff that comes from the lymph nodes. It's like the lymph glands rather. It's pus essentially, and they do a little cut on the arm and just stick it right there in that cut. Sounds extremely unsanitary, and for the most part, it is. But this whole practice of variolation began, which is named after the variola virus, which is smallpox.
I'll just make one comment. Gross.
Yeah, gross.
Gross.
And if anybody, I'll just get this out of the way for you two. If anybody's about to make the joke of what is big pox, it's syphilis.
I wasn't going to make the joke because I knew the answer, but it crossed my mind.
I wasn't going to make the joke, and I'm really disappointed in myself that I wasn't going to make the joke.
I was really hoping I'd catch you with an immediate answer, but oh well. Europe didn't catch on to this very fast, due to thinking that it was a savage and unsanitary foreign practice. Admittedly, it was pretty gross. However, leave it to a celebrity to change public perception. That's going to be a big thing in this episode. Mm-hmm. Enter Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, a famous English aristocrat and poet known for her travels and writings about the Ottoman Empire. There she encountered the Ottomans practicing variolation. Being a victim of smallpox herself, leaving a dead brother and terrible scars all over her own body in its wake, she took personal interest in spreading this practice to Europe. So, she had the practice practice performed on her son. It's very, very good test subject to start with. Then more publicly variolated her daughter in front of the physicians of the royal court in 1721. Both children received immunity to smallpox. This led Dr. Charles Maitland, who supervised Lady Montagu's son's vaccination, to conduct an experiment on the viability of variolation. Guess who he picked to use in the experiment?
Yeah.
Prisoners. 6 London prisoners. Yep.
I thought you were going to say some sort of like celebrity or historical figure. I thought you were like, oh, this interesting person got involved.
No, Greg, they're important. Why would you get a celebrity involved? Come on. Anyway, 6 London prisoners were chosen to be inoculated with smallpox scabs, then exposed to live smallpox shortly after. All were proven immune and were pardoned shortly after that.
Nice.
Okay, that's a pretty good reward, honestly, though. I mean, however...
The ethics are a little dubious.
Yeah. So I will say this, though. Variolation did have its problems because some people get full-blown cases of smallpox and just end up dead. However, the percentage of mortality from variolation is astronomically smaller than full-blown smallpox. We'll just say that much. Variolation caught the attention of the English royal family, who began to promote the practice in a widespread manner, but not without its complications. Many religious groups across Europe began to oppose variolation as it was against God's will to play with such maladies. When it's people's time, it's your time. Just die. Just die. You're not supposed to live for that. Come on. You have smallpox. Also, another complication, King George III's eighth son died after being variolated. Whoopsie. Ooh. Whoopsie. Hey, at least he was just the eighth son, though, right? I mean, honestly.
He's got more to spare.
Variolation even made its way to the colonies of America, where, like Britain, many religious movements started to reject a dangerous but significantly less dangerous than full-blown smallpox practice. As you can tell, a lot of the reason America was colonized was for religious freedom. They had extremely, stick-in-the-mud Puritans coming over here to not be ostracized. Yeah, exactly. They were such fucking nerds. They didn't just want to join the Anglican Church. What's wrong with them? So,
nerds.
There was one quite famous religious and judicial figure that openly encouraged variolation. Do you guys want to guess who this was? Please take a nice jab. Think about it. Colonial times,
Columbus.
Crazy religious. Not Columbus. He was probably a piece of shit giving more people smallpox. As a matter of fact, I'll say it. He was.
Who's the religion?
None other than Patsy Master and Witch Hunter Supreme, Cotton Mather. Famously known for spearheading the deaths of 20 innocent people during the Salem witch trials.
Oh, Jesus.
He learned of the practice of variolation from his slave, Onesimus, who was gifted to him by his congregation. Isn't that nice? Isn't that such a nice gift from a congregation right there? Just a person.
This whole thing.
Yeah. Mather contributed to the quelling of a smallpox outbreak in Massachusetts. Since he didn't completely stop the spread of smallpox, Mather gained possibly his only unwarranted controversy. For this, a bomb was thrown at his house, with tons of graffiti written on it saying, "A pox on you." History is strange. Also, guys, did you know that Cotton Mather's dad, his name was Increase Mather? Did they just pick from a random dictionary and just give the kid that name that they saw?
That was literally my next question. Yep.
I don't know how naming convention worked for the Mather family, but I kind of want to bring it back. It would be really fun. Wait, Josh, you haven't named your kid yet, have you?
No, I have not.
Hey.
Not your already born kid. We know your kid's name right now, but the other one. We
can legally change him too.
Yeah, we can legally change. We should just do a word draw and just pull it out.
If y'all give $500 to Patreon, we're going to legally change the child.
Carlene and I have joked about naming our future kid Popsicle. We will actually do it if we get a $500 a month Patreon contribution.
Well, I was going to say,
love it.
We turn this into a Patreon pledge. Let's go for it.
Yeah. Before we get fully into the land of the free, let's get back to Europe for a few minutes. Variolation was a giant step in combating the horrible illness of smallpox, little brother of big pox, as we had said before. However, there were non-negligible dangers to variolation. Some people still contracted smallpox from it, and also ran the risk of catching other infections due to poor sanitary practices. As we said, you're rubbing something into an open wound. There's other bacteria that can get in there, and other viruses probably. The death rate from variolation was about 2 to 3%. That is, until a milkmaid came along. The question is, which one? Most people, I'm going to ask you guys right now, do you know anything about the very first smallpox vaccine or anything like that? Who
Not
made
really.
it? Okay, that's fine. So this is all...
I only knew about the scab thing you'd been talking about.
Okay, so this is mostly new. Most people lightly familiar with the development of vaccines is aware of a man known as Edward Jenner. Jenner was an English surgeon and generally curious person. His earlier works include a publication concerning his fascination with the cuckoo. The cuckoo. I don't know how to say it. Cuckoo? Cock? So...
God, I knew it was coming.
He wrote that he observed when eggs were fostered by another hen, the resulting hatchling would kick out the other eggs and chicks from the nest. Dick move. Many naturalists decried this observation and said it was nonsense. However, in 1921, this was actually photographed, this whole phenomenon, and Jenner was vindicated. So apparently little foster birds are shitheads. Foster kids, right? Just don't get them. Anyway, In May 1796, Jenner was assisting a milkmaid named Sarah Nelms with a case of cowpox. During this interaction, Jenner happened to notice that he never saw milkmaids contract smallpox. He later tested the theory that people contracting the much less lethal cowpox would be immune to smallpox by inoculating his gardener's kid with the yep,
What the fuck?
Jesus.
with Sarah Nelm's cowpox scabs. So he was like, found his gardener's kid, scraped off some of the scabs from his patient, and then put it in the kid. This shit's ridiculous. I love all the test subjects throughout this, and I thank them for being test subjects, willing or non-willing. They made some good leaps, but we'll say that some of the experimenters were a little bit unethical. But
Old-timey science has so many problems.
Ethics weren't invented till 1938, so we can give them a pass. The 8-year-old boy, James Phipps, felt mildly ill but quickly recovered. Then Jenner injected Phipps with an actual smallpox.
Good.
And luckily no effect happened. Thus began vaccination, rooting from the Roman word for cow, vaca. The cow that unknowingly contributed to saving the lives of millions was named Betsy. And supposedly her hide is like in a museum right now, but it might not be the real hide of that cow. Doesn't that feel good? Like if you're the guy, like what if Thomas Edison just like had his skull filled with a filament and was made a human light bulb after his death? Like, do you think that that would be justified as like a historic remembrance of him? So Jenner gained honors, fame, and notoriety around the world. Napoleon Bonaparte, who was the first to vaccinate an army, interesting fact, was such a fan of Jenner that he released English prisoners at his request. And yeah, Napoleon said something to along the lines of, "Oh, Jenner, how can I ever deny you?" And I think Jenner, what he said was there were some English scientists that were imprisoned in French, in the French language. But Jenner pretty much said, hey, science is never at war with each other. Generally, the scientific community is all in it together. Please, these guys aren't spies. They're just scientists. Please let them out. And Napoleon was like, sure, you know what? You get a pass. And then Napoleon invented that nice 3-colored ice cream. Okay.
You bastard.
That's the story that most people know, but there were other versions. Benjamin Jesty was a regular farmer who noticed the same pattern of milkmaids not catching smallpox. So he took his whole family to a neighbor's farm and rubbed cowpox all over them. Naturally, he was both ostracized and correct at the same time. This happened in 1774, 12 years before Jenner's experiments. Wow. He was only recognized later in 1806, but he was also awarded 30,000 pounds in total and received a thank you letter from the Royal Society and had a portrait commissioned. Guys, I'm going to let you sidetrack for a second to look up a picture of Benjamin Jesty. When the time came to be painted, Jesty wore outdated clothes, was visibly annoyed by the formalities, and had so much trouble sitting still for the portrait that a piano player had to be brought in to calm his nerves. And the portrait clearly reflects that.
Yes, it does.
It looks like he's at gunpoint for this. He wanted nothing to do with it. There was also the German teacher Peter Plett, who heard the same anecdotes about milkmaids and performed what was now known as vaccination on 2 students of his. Then he was ostracized and eventually let go by his university. But perhaps the most interesting contender in the race to cripple smallpox was a man named John Fuster, who in 1763 tried to variolate 2 boys by traditional means. The boys didn't develop the typical mild illness associated with variolation. Then Fuster learned that they previously had cowpox. He brought up this perplexing case to a few fellow physicians at a dinner party that evening, 2 of whom were a doctor named Daniel Ludlow and his 14-year-old apprentice, Edward Jenner.
Oh, shit.
This is about 30 to 40 years before Jenner's experiments. The thing is that Jenner was the first person to properly implement scientific method to this, so he got all the beans. So here's where things get contentious, if they weren't already. Vaccines make their way to America, and famous Americans start experimenting with vaccines, like Thomas Jefferson. Guess who he experimented on?
Slaves.
You got it.
I didn't want to be right. I did not want to be correct.
Yep, he went ahead and experimented on a bunch of his slaves, and then eventually his family, and then he brought it up to other white people. So eventually vaccines became widespread due to several politicians being into this. with vaccination becoming mandatory in Massachusetts in 1809. Mandatory.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. Eventually, variolation became illegal by the 1840 Vaccination Act, and vaccinations were offered optional and free of charge. So one thing's good, another thing's bad in my opinion. I kind of have the well poisoned for myself, though. Detractors started to pop up left and right, including a man named William Tebb. Tebb was a prominent anti-abolitionist, anti-vivisectionist, founded a college for the blind, was staunchly against animal cruelty, and was a general all-around humanist. He was also against vaccination. I want you guys to think about those things because the whole during the smallpox situation, I will elaborate on this much more, but this guy wasn't a bad dude.
That's a big problem in the early days of vaccination, is you had these people who opposed it, but they were not all bad people. Like, it's not like they were all just trying to take over the world and make money and like all these like, cliche terrible things you would expect in someone. There's a lot of like women's suffrage as well that is rooted in early anti-vaccination. It's weird. We'll get to it, I'm sure, but I came across that in some of my research.
Yeah. So this is where a pattern begins. In the late 1860s, William Tebb spearheaded a movement against vaccinations by forming the National Anti-Vaccination League, probably the most honest name in the entirety of anti-vaccination groups. Tebb was a strong proponent of social liberty. He felt that no person could be subject to a compulsory action to their own body. At the time, the Vaccination Act of 1867 stated that any parents of a child not vaccinated within 3 months of birth could be convicted and fined. This was draconian by any other standard to me. But the sudden outbreaks and deaths called for extreme measures in the eyes of the government, and I tend to agree with that. However, Tebb was not without reason, since smallpox vaccines at the time could still have dire results, with an estimated, once again, 2 to 3% mortality rate. This was not a factor in his unsubstantiated claim that vaccines had caused upwards of 48,000 deaths in England alone. Once again, I say unsubstantiated. Didn't happen. Also, Tebb flirted with theosophy, a concept that will assuredly rear its ugly face again in this podcast. Fuck Madame Blavatsky. I want to get into theosophy so bad, but I can't. The long story is pre-Nazis. There was also John Pitcairn, who was a homeopath and a follower of the spiritualist Emanuel Swedenborg. And Pitcairn eventually went on to form the Anti-Vaccination League of America. His motives likely stem from his son contracting a blood infection from a likely poorly sanitized vaccine inoculation. Remember that, because that's going to be a big thing in the future too, as I am sure Josh knows, and Greg.
Yep.
In 1866, Mary Baker Eddy founded Christian Science. This group was staunchly against vaccines and insisted prayer healings... Yep, I'm sorry, I should have given you a sigh break for a second. They insisted prayer healings could cure smallpox much better. These quote-unquote irregular doctors, as they would soon be called, soon became popular among a populace that was already suspicious of its own government and healthcare providers. This sprung forth a new wave of quote-unquote irregulars that included homeopaths, mail-order herbalists, and Native American healing practices. I will note to you that a lot of these Native American healers were not Native American. Oddly enough, the homeopaths were deeply split in their view of vaccines, since the foundation of their sham bullshit non-medicine is that like cures like. No. That blew my fucking mind learning that homeopaths did not know where to land on vaccines, considering it almost vindicated their entire worldview for once. It's a strange little happening.
Well, homeopathic literally means, it's a like malady, right?
Yeah.
Or like similar malady.
Yeah.
And so what they do is they reduce it and put it in water and dilute it to the point of it being 1/10,000,000th of a percent or something ridiculous.
To the point where it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. And they're like, oh yeah, you drank this. And it's like, but you're doing the same concept as a vaccine. You're just diluting it to the point of where it's pointless.
Oh, they were still giving you just straight up water. So that's one thing.
Oh yeah, no, totally. But the idea is that which is what a vaccine is, as you said.
Yeah. It's a crazy infighting, to say the least.
It's frustrating. They were so close and they missed it.
So close. Several smallpox outbreaks around the world led to widespread compulsory vaccination laws, causing civil unrest over the freedom of the individual. And I totally get that. One of these laws led to the 1885 riots in Montreal, where as many as 100,000 attended. So just before we go a little bit forward to the 20th century, which is going to be a big section of this, I want you to think about that. I really do mostly agree with people having the freedom for their body. I mean,
well, it's the old saying, right? Is my right to express myself begins with the end of my fist and ends at the beginning of your face.
Yeah.
And so the idea is like, as long as you aren't impacting others, that's fine. But by not vaccinating, you are most definitely impacting those around you.
Oh yeah.
Can I give an apt comparison?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So this is like making you wear a seatbelt when you drive a car, right? So the law is like you have to wear your seatbelt, right? If you don't wear your seatbelt, it's mostly going to affect you. When you drive drunk, i.e., not get vaccinations, you're harming those around you as well. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It is a admitted recklessness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's fast forward a little bit to the 20th century, the turn of the 20th century particularly. So right around 1900, because a lot of shit goes down around 1900. Here's a quote from Pox, and I think this really does encapsulate things pretty damn well. Many intersectional movements for anti-vax were vegetarianism, anti-imperialism, anti-vivisectionism, women's rights, Georgism, which is like a libertarian single tax thing, like on a property, and anti-censorship brought about by the Comstock laws, and anti-state eugenics. So literally everything but one of those, maybe two, was a pretty good thing that is widely acceptable around here right now and widely hailed in our current day. So it's this crazy transition where they're still trying to really bring out freedom of the person. And that's like the best point I would say that this movement had at this point. I don't know if you guys would push back on me at that one right there, but I totally get the argument of just the body that you have is the body that you should be controlling and nobody else should be controlling. And once again, America was founded off of civil liberties, of, being able to be an individual. So
Freedom
Yeah.
to do what you want,
Freedom!
when you want, where you want.
This is in direct contradiction to the U.S.'s flirtation with colonialism that spread to the Spanish-American War of 1898. Greg, do you know anything about the Spanish-American War?
I mean, yes. The Spanish-American War was basically over what most would consider now a false flag attack, or at least a misunderstanding. And it led to a very one-sided conflict between the U.S. and Spain and solidified America's eminence as a world power. That is a very gross overgeneralization, but not being prepared for that question, that's the best I'm going to do.
Greg says misunderstanding. I say excuse.
I say at best.
There were some annexations that happened. The U.S. Army was battling smallpox outbreaks in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines all at the same time. Ironically, but unsurprisingly, the epidemic occurrences rose after the soldiers showed up in these prospective locations. So, where the soldiers go, the outbreaks follow.
Yeah.
The U.S. decided they needed to protect their troops by any means, not the villagers. So they took an ambitious measure to stop outbreaks. This included compulsory vaccinations, either at gunpoint or threat of jail, and burning down the entirety of villages. Like, if they had an outbreak, get those guys out of there, burn down the village. And that ends it. Done. However, the most ambitious campaign saw nearly the entire island of Puerto Rico, over 860,000 people, vaccinated in a 5-month span. That is absolutely insane to me.
And the fact that they had enough vaccinations readily available for that many people in 5 months is insane.
Well, they had this thing where they would do arm to arm was mainly with variolation. But anyway, the amount of smallpox deaths per year in the 1800s, in the 1880s particularly, was about 620. So about 620 deaths per year in Puerto Rico. By the early 1900s, the number had dropped to nearly 2.
Shit.
So this shows that it's effective. I mean, does anybody want to comment on the means? Tell me how you're feeling about what the U.S. has done concerning their aggressive campaign against smallpox.
Maybe a bit too harsh. Maybe a bit too harsh at times, but their heart was in the right place.
I would usually say yes, but then I'm like, is it? I don't know. The burning down villages I don't agree with, but yeah, just, this is for your own good type of thing. I'm sounding so fucking authoritarian right now, and I hate it. I really do.
Ryan has clearly never had a child, not eat something that they need to eat. This is for your own good. You will eat this.
It makes a fascist of us all.
Take the beta carotene in the carrots. It's good for you.
Fathers are fascists. That's going to be the tagline of Rumor Flies now.
I think Greg and I start our own spin-off podcast.
Yeah. At the same time of the Spanish-American War, Dr. Joseph McCormick of Bowling Green, Kentucky, yes, the same location of the infamous Bowling Green Massacre, was put in charge of quelling a smallpox epidemic in Middlesboro, Kentucky. Sorry, just had to throw that in there. We got to get to current history.
Bowling Green, never forget.
Yep. The general population was distrustful of this new medical practice that could cause immediate sickness, irritation, and swelling of the arm, because there were immediate side effects to the smallpox vaccine, as I had listed. This caused the poorer, predominantly black workers to be out of an income source for about 2 weeks and potentially life or death situation. That's the thing that really hits me the most. Like, if you have something that you might get hit by smallpox, but also if you guaranteed get this, you're probably not going to sustain yourself and your family for an extended amount of time, and then you might also die. That does sound scary, admittedly so. And honestly, they treated poorer populations like like just children. They saw them as infantile. However, the pox continued to spread, and something had to be done so this epidemic did not spread to other cities. In order to serve what he felt to be the greater good, McCormick had citizens held down and vaccinated at gunpoint. Their own American citizens. This shit, they were not fucking around with this. The 1900 all-nations block smallpox outbreak in New York had become a focal point of a battle encompassing the working class, the religious, race, the government as a nanny state, and the misunderstood good intentions of the scientific community. With little health care available to a poor immigrant neighborhood, so-called pest houses were set up to facilitate the recovery of smallpox victims, though these did little to stop the spread with the current sanitary standards at the time. And even though this neighborhood was diversely populated, at the time recently by Italian immigrants, the common term for smallpox was the N-word itch, due to the belief that black people had lower constitution and sanitary standards, much akin to the whole race of adolescents, as they would say. So, we don't use the term constitution anymore, but that just is even more insulting if you ask me. Like, they don't have the good willpower to not get sick. Yeah, this is where the racism starts coming in. Sorry, people, if this is a little bit tough, but
and the thing is, though, that the history of medicine and stuff often has like a lot of very sordid racial and bigoted components, unfortunately. Well, as do most elements of history.
Well, here's the thing. It was also called Cuban itch during the Spanish-American War. They just picked people that weren't white people to call it for that itch. Although it was called kangaroo itch at one point too. I don't know why. Don't get it. So,
not as derogatory, I guess.
Yeah. So these measures required people to be dragged out of their homes to pest houses against their will. Entire apartment complexes were raided, held down, and vaccinated, and the compulsory vaccinations drove a further wedge between authority and its people. And once again, like I said, this is not only the poor black neighborhoods or anything like that. This is also the poor Italians that didn't know what was going on when a doctor showed up with 2 guards next to him yelling outside of an apartment complex because they didn't speak English. And then a whole squad of people would run in with guns and drag them out or hold them down and vaccinate them door by door. It's terrifying. I would hate that, especially since you don't understand exactly what they're doing. They didn't know what was going on. I mean, they probably saw people with smallpox, but they didn't know what they were being injected with. It was scary, to say the least. Yeah, so this is where it gets tough in terms of this history. Ultimately, the epidemic was stopped from spreading, but the lack of nuance would place an unsurmountable gap between the people and those that want to protect them for years to come. This is kind of what sows the seeds of discord with the anti-vaccination sentiment. Because, honestly, you had a government that was just forcing something on you and were not keeping you in the know. They were just getting you to do this and fucking deal with it. However, constant resistance to compulsory vaccinations led many families across all social, religious, and racial groups to bypass getting jabbed, as they would say, by any means, from faking vaccination papers to sucking out the vaccine as soon as it was administered, and in more extreme cases, using a word-of-mouth recipe for an acid solution that could imitate the vaccination scar. So it was like a home remedy to fake the scar from getting vaccination. And this wasn't I looked at the recipe, I didn't write it down. It was not a fun acid, I'll put it that way. It's crazy. It's insane. In 1904, just to show how widespread it was, there was also a vaccine revolt in Rio de Janeiro. This had spread pretty much worldwide, or at least the most quote-unquote Western civilization. I don't know if you count South America as that, but I do for the most part. So, regardless of the resistances, variole in major and minor cases began to steadily drop by the turn of the 20th century, but not without its detractors. Are we ready for the OG anti-vaxxers, guys?
Let's do it.
A more or less victory for vaccines happened in 1901 during a smallpox epidemic in Boston. An anonymous circular was being, and by circular it's pretty much a pamphlet, was being dispersed saying that doctors could waive vaccination to any children that were deemed unfit for receiving the smallpox vaccine. Yes, there were people that were more, receptive, like they were more likely to get sick from the smallpox vaccine. However, it wasn't every child. This circular thought otherwise. The circular's opinion is that no children were fit to receive vaccines, so tell your doctor. And pretty much that was just saying, yeah, you shouldn't get this whatsoever. Deal with it. Pretty sad stuff. This is the first chainmail, I guess. However, we're about to have a good story right here. Dr. Samuel Durgan held a lecture at his university stating that if anyone was so sure that a simple, healthy lifestyle would protect from smallpox, they could arrange to be inoculated and put their beliefs to the test. This is still something that people say today. Just keep a clean bill of health and you are not going to catch any disease. It's not that simple. It's still something said today. One man took him up on this. Emmanuel Pfeiffer was a quote-unquote doctor and spiritualist, most known for publicity stunts like supposedly fasting for over a month. He was a mixture of John Edwards and David Blaine back then, but a complete asshole. I'm sure David Blaine's all right. He's fine. John Edwards, I have more of a bone to pick with, but
was he the guy that was he the one that would call people in the audience and like talk to the dead? Was that him?
Yeah, John Edwards is the guy that did like Crossing Over or something like that. Yeah,
that's terrible. That's it. What a dude.
More false hope. So here's an example of one of Dr. Pfeiffer's failed gotcha moments at a physician's lecture. Josh and Greg, here's where your participation comes in.
Yay.
Greg, I would like you to play the role of Emmanuel Pfeiffer, and Josh, I would like you to play the role of Dr. McCullum, who was giving the lecture. During this lecture, Pfeiffer decided to rise up during a Q&A and start being an incessant asshole. And here is just some of the lines of questionings that he did. Here's a stage play in 4 lines. During the lecture, Emmanuel Pfeiffer rose.
Is it not true, Doctor, that men of science and immense learning have effectually claimed that persons whose bodies are cleanly, sound, and generally healthy are protected from smallpox?
Dr. McCullum responded,
No, it is not true, and I do not recollect of hearing any learned scientific men making any such claim.
Pfeiffer responded,
Is it not admitted by eminent physicians and learned men that there are more ills resulting from vaccination than from the disease of smallpox?
And Dr. McCullum responded,
I have never heard a scientific man say such a thing.
Ooh.
It didn't matter. Pfeiffer just kept asking these rhetorical questions that were also false to plant doubts in the audience's mind. This is a big deal to worry about, and I'm going to talk about one little quote about this eventually. After Pfeiffer took Durgan's challenge, skipping back over to Durgan putting out his challenge, they met at a pest house and had someone cough into Pfeiffer's face effectively. Durgan then had people track Pfeiffer's movements for the next few days, and right up until the day... And right
I know how this ends.
You heard about this?
Ends. Yes.
Yeah. Right up until the day that the symptoms of the smallpox would arise, which is about day 11 or 12, Durgan had completely disappeared.
Yup, motherfucker ran.
He was later tracked down to a farmhouse upstate that he had fled to with his supposed mistress and was near death. He survived.
Somehow.
Thankfully, which fueled fire from him believing a good constitution could ward off smallpox. Pfeiffer went on to push legislators to pass anti-compulsory vaccination bills for years to come, but his image was irrevocably damaged. Irrevocably? Yeah, we'll go with irrevocably. I want to talk about two things about this story. Number one, this was stubbornness versus irresponsibility. As much as I love this little anecdote, Durgan took somebody who thought he was immune to smallpox and set him out into the general population who is definitely not immune to smallpox. So once again, shame on him for that. But I'm glad that Pfeiffer was a good example of, not everybody's safe, because this guy was in late stages and he miraculously survived. However, I do want to talk about one quote that we can get back to later on. And I think that Durgan really does, the Durgan and Pfeiffer tuffle that they had really is encapsulated in this quote by Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes. The irregular understands the hydrostatic paradox of controversy, that it raises the meanest disputant to a seeming level with his antagonist. So that's going to bring up a question of how do you approach this? Durgan knew that him making a giant fuss was going to elevate him to the public mind space. And the doctors going back at him showed that Pfeiffer was at equal playing ground with them, and therefore both sides of the argument deserved equal attention.
And see, this is actually a common debated issue that we're going to talk a little bit more in my section. But I love that you're bringing that up right now, because the whole thing of when you engage, are you not only amplifying their voice, but validating it as an opinion worth entertaining? It's like a very interesting question.
Yep. Okay. Now, another giant hit to vaccinations was a batch of diphtheria vaccine that led to the death of 13 children in St. Louis, all thanks to someone named Jim the Horse. Do you guys know about Jim?
Can you please tell me that's not a nickname? Please tell me his parents called him Jim the Horse, whatever their last name is.
No, it was more of an actual horse.
Oh,
yep.
This is so much better. Please continue.
So, diphtheria vaccine was developed around this time, and like the early 1900s, and they would do something where they would inoculate horses with diphtheria and create the vaccine through something called attenuation, where once it's in the body, it's starting to be weakened, and that's where they got the vaccine from. And they would use horses and cattle to make these vaccines. Now, Jim the Horse was a very good horse for a good bit. This wasn't his fault. He made tons of batches of vaccine for a while. However, eventually, Jim caught tetanus. And these batches were mislabeled. And to this day, they cannot figure out who actually mislabeled these for the dates, because they found out that Jim had tetanus and unfortunately had to be put down. But the previous batch for what they thought was before he caught tetanus was labeled wrong, and they distributed it across St. Louis and killed up to 13 children. It's a very unfortunate story, but this is a seed of where people thought that the diphtheria vaccine was so dangerous. It wasn't the vaccine itself. It was the poor sanitary standards and poor filing. Now, put as much onus as you want on that aspect of it, because sure, it did kill people, but it was not the vaccine itself. I just want to get that out the way. And the benchmark case for anti-vaxxers using all of their ammunition in court was something known as the Henning-Jacobson case. Do you guys know anything about this?
No.
Wonderful.
Nope.
Wonderful. Pastor Henning Jacobson was a Swedish immigrant who denied vaccination when Massachusetts had mandatory vaccination laws. He claimed that he and his son had previously suffered blood infection from vaccination years and years ago. He was fined, then fought the fine all the way up to the motherfucking Supreme Court. And that's where this movement got savvy. They appealed the fine, arguing that it was a violation of the 14th Amendment. So they decided to use one of the amendments that gave equal rights to African Americans over freedom of will for this whole libertarian ideal that it was their body, their rights. And it puts me in such a weird bind in my thoughts, politically, ethically, whatever you want to call it, moral grandstanding. But in this case, I think it was, I understand what they were doing, and it was unfortunate they did it. Vaccinations, according to Jacobson, were a violation of his individual freedom and rights. After long arbitration and a wide media attention, the Supreme Court denied his appeal. Justice John Marshall Harlan commented that, quote, "There are manifold restraints to which each person is necessarily subject to for the common good." So he's saying that pretty much you're going to have to give up some rights for everybody's good. Once again, I don't know how to feel about it, but in this case, I get it. I don't know. Guys, save me. Long story short,
ideology is complicated.
This case said that fines and imprisonment were okay, but forcing vaccination was not. The dire circumstance of an epidemic, however, did justify the circumvention of some normally personal freedoms. Guys, do you want to guess how much Henning Jacobson's initial fine was?
I'm trying to decide what direction it went in.
$5.
Josh,
$5 million.
That was one of the most important $5 in the history of the United States. It was $5 that went to the Supreme Court. And today,
are you serious?
I was right.
Are you serious?
It was $5. He went to the Supreme Court for it. Granted, okay, let's give it a little bit more of a shake. Today, it would be like somebody going to the Supreme Court for $150.
Oh man, big deal. That's $150, man.
He was frugal, to say the least, and he still ended up having to pay the $5. Oh man. However, there is one little terrifying thing I'd like to mention here. There was Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who was one of the other Supreme Court justices, who was one of the biggest proponents of free speech and individual freedoms. He actually sided with this. And let me go ahead and read from Pox once again. Even after Holmes established himself as one of the nation's greatest champions of First Amendment rights, compulsory vaccination remained for him a powerful metaphor for the reasonable sacrifices that the state could demand of its citizens. In 1927, the justice cited Jacobson versus Massachusetts and nothing else as he upheld the right of the state of Virginia to sterilize an allegedly feeble-minded woman named Carrie Puck against her will. Here's the quote from him. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover the cutting of fallopian tubes, Holmes wrote in some of the most chilling words ever delivered from the Supreme Court. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. So, forced sterilization from vaccination. Scary shit in my mind. This is getting rough, but okay, guys, I took you through the worst of it until today. Here's where things start turning up a little bit. Scientific advances would continue over the next few decades, and would continue. And detractors of vaccines, many of whom had a loved one or themselves harmed by vaccines, would continue to push back. Sanitary practices would be better implemented, reducing cases. Eventually, the last smallpox outbreak in the United States would occur in 1947. The Cold War surprisingly fostered efforts to eradicate smallpox worldwide, with the United States and USSR implementing concerted efforts in smallpox campaigns. So that's one good thing of the Cold War, right? Smallpox, gone. After the World Health Organization undertook an extremely aggressive and almost militaristic smallpox campaign globally, the world had finally seen its last natural smallpox case in 1977. There was a situation in 1978 where a woman named Janet Parker died in Britain because there was a lab that had a really shitty doctor who just let smallpox go willy-nilly through the ventilation system and ended up killing or giving a small isolated smallpox outbreak in this neighborhood. Weird shit. However, research kind of ended completely, and right now there's only, I think, 2 cases, like 2 actual live cells of smallpox in Georgia and Moscow. So, interestingly enough, Atlanta, Georgia, that is. So, smallpox is gone. Then, the work of those like John Hilleman, who helped invent over 40 vaccines, John Enders and Hugh Kingsley Ward, whose polio vaccine saved an estimated 120 million lives, and the trio of Pearl Kendrick, Lonnie Clinton Gordon, and Grace Elderling, whose pertussis vaccine would make whooping cough a rare disease, up until today rather, should be regarded as a testament to humanity and the true good that scientific advances can achieve. And it's just a couple of people. I'd like to list so many ones, but ultimately, we're in a much better place than we were even 50 years ago. A lot of these diseases, polio's gone completely. And we will talk about the polio vaccine in part 2, just letting you know. We know that there were issues with it, but not for this purview at the moment. It just shows that, yes, vaccines did help the world, saved countless lives, and just made the world a generally safer place where we can worry about our fellow man rather than some tiny little bioweapon from nature. It's, I'm glad to be living right now. However, let's give some numbers. Between 1958 to 1962, right before the measles vaccine was licensed, there were over 500,000 reported measles cases and 400 deaths each year. By 1998, when cases would start to shoot back up, there were 89 cases of measles and no deaths. So
wow.
That's just to show.
That's like a 99.99 something % reduction.
Yeah. And that number, I think, should speak for itself more than anything else I've said. The last case of wild transmitted polio in the United States was in 1979. So smallpox is gone, boom. Polio's gone, boom. And I think recently polio was eliminated from India as well. Don't quote me on that one. Now, here's where I get less charitable and excuses go out the door for a lot of the anti-vaccination sentiment. You guys ready?
Let's do it, baby.
In 1977, a British doctor named Gordon Stewart published a paper stating that the diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus vaccine, known as DTP, was responsible for permanent brain damage in children, citing several concerned parents that reached out to him with allegedly vaccine-damaged children. So this wasn't necessarily a scientific study. It was just him previously having given sentiments to vaccines hurting people, and then it went into a feedback loop where parents came to him and said, oh yeah, that was my kid, and then he published a paper. We'll get into the types of studies and why this is the worst type of study that he published. Let's take a quick look, though, at some of Gordon Stewart's previous claims. In 1968, Stewart published an article in The Lancet contesting Robert Koch's, not the same type of Koch, germ theory by saying it was a gross simplification where they ignored other factors that cause disease. These factors included behavior, socioeconomics, and quote-unquote genetic constitution. For anybody that is not aware of dog whistles, that means race. You gotta love it. You have to love it. So, later on in the 1980s, Stewart held the position that AIDS was not caused by HIV, but instead was the result of a gay lifestyle. Stewart believed that sperm in the butt triggered a collapse of the immune system. Let's ignore the fact that straight couples do that too. I fucking hate this guy. And now
Can I just say that Ryan's note literally says, quote, I fucking hate this guy.
Yeah. It does. Greg, here's where you come in because I wanted you to share pain with me. Read the quote from Stewart concerning HIV and AIDS.
Oh, this is so much better he's reading it.
Every time an avowed homosexual or bisexual rock or film star dies of the disease, he is elevated to martyr or hero.
I'm just saying facts, man. I'm just saying facts. What's wrong? Why are you calling me
I'm
weird?
just asking questions.
Just asking questions. Dude, oh my God. After Gordon Stewart's 1977 paper against DPT vaccine was published, childhood vaccinations in the UK dropped from 79% to 31%. You want to guess what happened after that?
A lot more people got
Everyone
fucking
lived
sick.
happily ever after. Everyone was totally fine and healthy.
A whooping cough outbreak happened. Who would have thunk? Who would have thunk it? Over 100,000 cases of whooping cough, 5,000 hospitalized, and 36 children died. Gordon Stewart doubts this even happened. To give you an idea of what whooping cough is, because it is not exactly a very common thing right now, thankfully, more common than the 90s, I wonder why that happened. It starts out as a simple cold, and then eventually there is a whooping cough that happens, which is the namesake of it, where children start to have this ridiculously painful, disease, essentially. And it starts to inflame the lungs. They start to turn a blue from just lack of oxygenation. And eventually, if they're lucky and not die at this point, some children can end up on something called an ECMO, which is effectively an artificial lung and heart for the child. This still does not guarantee their survival. Whooping cough is a big fucking deal. And 79 to 31%. This guy alone was able to just cause this thought virus that insurmountably affected a whole lot of people. And now we get to 1982, where reporter Leah Thompson ran a primetime documentary called DPT, Vaccine
Can I add a little
Roulette.
something right here?
Yeah, sure.
Do you want to know something really funny about the title? Because I have a part about this later, but we can just roll it in here because I think you've got it pretty comprehensive, to be honest. Do you know what's funny about that title?
DTP Vaccine Roulette?
No, that's exactly it. It's called DPT vaccine roulette, not DTP. The vaccine's actually called DTP.
It's called.
And so they screwed up the name.
It's actually different between if you're in Britain and England. Britain and the U.S.
Is Leah Thompson, which one?
She's not British. I don't know why she called it DPT.
That's what I was saying, because I know in Dr. Offit's book, he made fun of the fact that she called it that. They were like, you think if you were going to do a comprehensive documentary about the dangers of something, you would bother to get it correct in the name, but...
To be fair, she did...
But I did not know the alternate name in the UK. So
there are different names, and surprise, surprise, let me continue this before I say why it's probably called DPT. In the program, Leah Thompson presents, and this is also not the Leah Thompson...
You also just cut all that stuff I said.
No, it's fine. So she is not the same Leah Thompson, the actor. Leah Thompson presents the dangers of diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus vaccine combination. She presented the dangers such as seizures, fever, encephalopathy, essentially just inflamed head, and other permanent brain damage happening to as many as 1 in 700 children using parent testimonials and interviews with doctors, including Gordon Stewart. So that's probably why it was called DPT as opposed to DTP. This was all mostly incorrect at best and maliciously disingenuous at worst. And we will address these claims more in part 2. But the ultimate result was parents across the country soon began to question doctors once again, and many refused vaccines for their children and called for regulation. For this fear-mongering, Leah Thompson was punished with an Emmy.
Oh, nice.
Gotta love it. Vaccine roulette inspired another prominent person in the anti-vaccination movement known as Barbara Loe Fisher, a mom who believed her son received permanent brain damage injuries from the DTP vaccine after she saw the Vaccine Roulette documentary to found the National Vaccine Information Center. Pretty innocuous name, right? No pun intended. This is a big problem that's going to come up. All of these vaccine awareness groups seem so like run-of-the-mill and not alarmism for the most part. The Vaccine Information Center, that doesn't sound wrong at all. I could have gone to that website and just been okay with it. Okay. But once again, we have a person whose child was injured and they wanted to blame vaccines. They didn't know why they were injured, but once they were given a solution, they hopped onto it, regardless if it was right or not. Barbara Loe Fisher also published a book in 1985 with Dr. Harris Coulter called DTP, A Shot in the Dark. Dr. Harris Coulter was not a medical doctor, but rather a social scientist and a homeopath.
Nice.
Nice, really nice. Love it. All this hubbub led to swaths of lawsuits against the vaccine manufacturers. This culminated in 1986 when Ronald Reagan signed into law the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. This law put a separate, quote-unquote, vaccine court where parents could claim that their children were injured by vaccines, and the government would pay them out of pocket as long as the claimed account of time between the vaccine administration and injury was reasonable. So the parents could say, hey, my kid started showing signs of X or Y, seizures, autism, whatever you want. And as long as it happened within like a year or two of the vaccine getting administered, the courts wouldn't fight back and just say, okay, you get it. And all these injuries were being de facto related to the table list of vaccines, or like table list of injuries. Note, this was not an admission of these injuries being de facto related to vaccines, but more of a means to save the vaccine manufacturers from being sued into bankruptcy. This was an economics and optics double-edged sword. So the good thing about this...
it still exists to today, by the way.
It does still exist today. The good thing about this court was it stopped all of these vaccine manufacturers from being litigated to high hell and not being able to produce these vaccines anymore because they had to get shut down, regardless if they were in the right or not. However, at the same rate, it was Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's cheaper for them and less time consuming for them just to write a check than it is to deal with it. I mean, that's the bottom line.
It was still an optics victory for
all
of the anti-vaccinationists because they were able to have something in law in a docked record of the entire cases that were settled and given in favor of the litigants. So I don't even know what to say about this. I don't even know how to feel about this act. On one side is good and one side is bad. But Regardless of the 1990 report from the National Academy of Sciences wholly discrediting the relationship between DTP and meningitis, autism, and chronic neurological damage, DTP was phased out due to public concern and replaced by something called DTaP in 1992. DTaP replaced something called the whole cell vaccine, which is pertussis, rather. So the way to say it is that generally the way this vaccine works is that it's like... I can do a better explanation of this. It's giving a attenuated or weakened version of the cell or potentially already dead version of the cell to the body to analyze and make resistances for. This whole cell vaccine was replaced with something called acellular antibodies for pertussis. Mm-hmm. And these antibodies didn't always work as well or as long. Guess what? It didn't work nearly as long as DTP, and DTaP requires a booster shot. You two being fathers now know booster shots. That's a thing, right? Yep. And these re-immunize the inoculated children, and guess what? They're often missed because people don't go to the doctor's appointment as frequently after the first 6 months of the baby being born. As evidence of this failure, in 2010, over 11,000 cases of whooping cough were reported in California alone, and at least 10 children died from it. This was the worst outbreak since 1947. No other figure has put more children in harm's way in the name of not putting children in harm's way than Andrew Wakefield. Wakefield was a rising star in the field of gastroenterology in Britain. In 1993, Wakefield made waves in the medical community with a paper connecting Crohn's disease and the presence of the measles virus. He posited that the measles virus persisted in the intestinal tract and resulted in the immune system constantly attacking the intestinal tract. Britain's Medical Research Council called this study so flawed that its conclusions were, quote-unquote, all but meaningless. Wakefield, being a persistent fucker in the same way that a cockroach is, published another paper in 1995. This connected the measles vaccine to inflammatory bowel diseases. The study's results were unable to be reproduced by any team that tried it, all the way from the U.S. to Japan. So first it was measles causes like IBS or Crohn's, and then they have, after that, the measles in the vaccine causes that too. But
so just real quick, let me jump in here just to kind of give a little
there's more
perspective.
From him. Yeah.
Well, just to give a little perspective from this, when he first came forward talking about a link between measles and Crohn's disease and gastrointestinal problems, people in the medical community were like, oh, cool. Okay. Like we can kind of see that because one of the things about Crohn's disease is that Crohn's disease is that they are susceptible to measles, at least from some of the research that I saw. There is definitely a correlation or, needing some more research into it. When he started pointing to the vaccine itself, that's when everybody's like, ooh, okay, this is going to be a bigger jump. Let's see how this goes.
Well, it's an easy logic to see because of just the idea of, Crohn's disease is an immune system response. Therefore, if you have a virus in your any part of your system, you're going to have your immune system going crazy, and therefore Crohn's for some reason.
Right.
It makes kind of sense for somebody that's not like aware of the actual facts on it, but that has not been reproduced whatsoever. However, Wakefield's magnum opus was his 1998 study that was published in The Lancet, a well-respected medical paper. In this paper, he connects autism to the measles portion of the MMR vaccine, which is measles, mumps, and rubella. This paper was so painstakingly misleading, dishonest, and filled with financial ulterior motives that we're probably going to have to dedicate about half of part 2 to it. In short, all the children in the study's parents were trying to sue the vaccine manufacturers. Wakefield was being paid about £55,000 by a lawyer to do the study, and Wakefield had already filed a patent for his own version of the measles vaccine months before. So, we're going to get more into that, but that'll give you a little bit of a back snapshot of why he may have published that paper. Andrew Wakefield's press conference after publishing the paper called for a single-use vaccine instead of a combo, that being measles, mumps, rubella, which is convenient since his patent was for only measles. Eventually, papers like the Daily Mail, the very respected rag of our time, picked up on this and started writing sensational headlines warning the dangers of vaccines. Take a wild guess of what happened in Britain over the next following years.
Numbers
Cases went up.
plummeted.
Measles outbreaks. Yeah, vaccines plummeted, measles
Yes.
rise. Britain recently was taken off of the eradicated list on WHO for measles. So, yeah.
Nice.
Gotta love it. Trust me, Wakefield will get much more time next episode. But then, there were the Mercury Moms, a group led by Lynn Redwood, a mom with an autistic child. Once again, we see a pattern here. And I'm not blaming the parents for this, okay? And also, I know I'm not being charitable to Wakefield, but he's a piece of shit. I'll say that one unscrupulously.
Now, was Mercury Moms the name of the group?
Yeah. The unofficial name of the group.
Okay.
The Mercury Moms are led by Lynn Redwood, a mom with an autistic child who blamed mercury in the form of thimerosal was the leading cause of autism from vaccines. The Mercury Moms publicity led to a 2000 hearing on vaccine safety by the House Reform Committee in the U.S. The chairman was Dan Burton, who, conveniently, had a daughter that was a part of the Mercury Moms. Yeah.
How was that legal?
He had an autistic grandchild, and he was sad that his grandchild did not become a basketball player and decided to just find a scapegoat. I get that it's a very... Autism is a very sensitive subject, and I feel for anybody that, has to live with autism or a child with autism, but you can't jump for the first thing that just seems easy to blame.
We'll get a little bit of that.
Yeah, sorry,
I'm
getting ahead of myself. This is where I get a little bit emotional because it's closer to home right now, like to current time. We are like light speed forwarding towards current day. Anyway, this brought the misinformed belief to the national stage. Another paper was published in 2000, same year, by a group called Safe Minds, which is a very long acronym for We Don't Like Vaccines. I'm just going to say that right now. The paper was called Autism, a Novel Form of Mercury Poisoning, which once again, if you didn't guess, blamed mercury in the form of thimerosal. This paper was rejected several times before being published in Medical Hypothesis, the New England Journal of Medicine, which is easily confused with a highly respected journal just called Medical Hypothesis. This New England Journal of Medicine called Medical Hypothesis is going to come up a couple more times in the next episode, probably. These led to thimerosal being removed from every childhood vaccine in 2001 due to pressure on the vaccine manufacturers to not get their asses sued off of them. Keep that in mind. Thimerosal is in very few vaccines. Even the flu vaccine now has an option to have a thimerosal or a non-thimerosal one.
We'll get into it.
Quick note on thimerosal. Once again, we'll get to the science later. It has no observed connection to autism, and its antibacterial properties could have prevented the tetanus outbreak started by poor Jim the horse. Then we have, in 2005, Salon and Rolling Stone published an article written by none other than Robert F. Kennedy Jr. called Deadly Immunity. And this was, once again, another hit on thimerosal. This took off like wildfire because two large magazines published it. And then, once again, vaccination rates started dropping. Eventually, Salon retracted their actual paper, the article, and Rolling Stone has kind of been more assholes about it. But now we get to some more of the public figures. America's mom or crazy aunt or whatever you want to call it, the person that gives you cars with giant tax deductions on it or actually tax burdens on it. Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey has not only had Katie Wright and Allison Singer from Autism Speaks on the show and kind of forced them to say that vaccines probably cause their kids autism. Keep in mind that both Katie Wright and Allison Singer both have, once again, autistic children. Common thing. But she had them on and had them kind of talk about their whole controversial view of vaccines causing autism. I would like to say that Autism Speaks has kind of like turned their views on autism. They're not really putting any money into research for vaccines and autism. Even Allison Singer, who I just mentioned, recently resigned as I think the president of the company, in about 2009. And she did it good. I think she did it good. That being said, Autism Speaks still did a whole lot of damage. And all of these foundations sound so innocuous that you wouldn't think that they would have these fringe beliefs that are not accepted by the scientific community whatsoever. But it's almost all of them. It's kind of crazy. There are good ones, I will say that much, and we'll give them credit eventually. And then Oprah also had somebody else on, Do you guys know who Jenny McCarthy is by any chance?
The person who doesn't want to be associated with being anti-vax?
Yeah, except she's extremely anti-vax. Jenny McCarthy...
By the way, you know she said that, right? Like, she doesn't want to be associated with anti-vaccines.
If you didn't want to be associated with the anti-vax movement, then you shouldn't have started the anti-vax movement.
Well,
it's pretty simple.
I don't know why she would want to be associated when she went on Oprah. And number one, I'll just give a little quick background to her. She was a Playboy model and also had a couple of shows. She was, I think, married to Jim Carrey for a while, and she has an autistic child who, just as a kind of a snapshot of like who Jenny McCarthy is, when a passerby noticed her on the streets in LA, they stopped her and said, "Wait a minute, Jenny, you're an indigo and your child is a crystal." That's a reference to indigo children, which, and crystal children now for the next generation, which is kind of like a metaphysical analogy for special gifted children, which also a lot of indigo children happen to be diagnosed as autistic. But anyway,
there's a really good Blurry Photos episode about it, actually.
Yeah, it's weird. Shout out to Blurry Photos. Anyway, so moving on from that, McCarthy on the Oprah Winfrey Show said that, yes, vaccines did cause my child's autism. And when Oprah said, "How do you know?" and McCarthy said something very, very, very succinct. Mommy instinct. Mommy instinct?
That's not how it works.
Mommy instinct. That's what
works.
caused it. Nonetheless, Oprah is one of the most serialized and watched shows in the United States alone. So shortly after, there was a press conference by RFK talking about the vaccine epidemic, I guess you'd say, and the autism epidemic from vaccines. It was RFK, and then he had another guy right on the side of the stage with him. Do you guys know who Robert De Niro is? Is that how you say it? De Niro?
Bobby D?
Oh, Robert De Niro. That's the guy. Yeah.
Bobby D.
Yes. Robert De Niro was entranced by Robert F. Kennedy's article and happened to have made acquaintances with him because his son is also autistic. And they held this press conference and the ball kept rolling. So much so that one little movie called Vaxxed was premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2016. And Robert De Niro runs the Tribeca Film Festival. It was eventually taken off, but do you know who one of the producers on Vaxxed was? Oh, Josh, you do. You do.
I will get to it if you want.
No, you can
or
go
I
ahead
can
and
spoil
save
it
it.
now.
It was Wakefield. So, also.
No. Incorrect.
It wasn't Wakefield?
Ooh.
No, Wakefield was the director. No, the writer. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. Writer, not director. Two different things. I'm sorry. My bad. So, I'm going to go with a couple of other recent things that have happened within the past 6 years. On March 28th, there was a tweet that got a lot of controversy. The tweet goes, "Healthy young child goes to doctor. Gets pumped with massive shot of many vaccines. Doesn't feel good and changes. Autism!" All capital letters. Many such cases. That person writing that March 2014 tweet would later to become our current president of the United States. So much so that on January 10th, 2017, the White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, who we still very much want on the show. If you know Sean Spicer, please get him on this show. We want to talk to him.
You want to talk to Shawnee Boy?
He confirmed that Robert F. Kennedy and President-elect Donald Trump met to discuss a position in the Trump administration. Do you want to know what that position was?
Department of Health.
Chairman of the Vaccine Safety Task Force.
Ooh.
It eventually fell through because somebody caught wind of it, but it did not. It's fine. It didn't happen. Did not happen.
God.
But that's just showing how high up the chain this scare has gone. And Josh, aside from what I'm about to say, I'm about to pass it to you, but I just want to let you know where we are in the current state of affairs. In terms of the law, today, every state except, surprisingly, Mississippi and West Virginia have religious exemption clauses for vaccines. And then 18 states have philosophical exemption, which is even worse. This is not good at all.
Far more. Yeah.
And we will focus on this heavily in part 2. Lastly, I just want to give you a current update of the celebrities right now across the board or from the past that have been staunchly anti-vax. Kevin Gates, well known for thinking with his dick. Frederick Douglass, Leo Tolstoy, Charlie Sheen, not a big surprise there, Kat Von D, known rapist Danny Masterson, Juliette Lewis, Jim Carrey, Bill Maher, Rob Schneider, Lisa Bonet.
The Stapler?
Yep, the Stapler. Lisa Bonet,
Okay.
Selma Blair, and Aaron fucking Brockovich.
Not Julia Roberts, but actual Aaron Brockovich?
Aaron Brockovich, the Aaron Brockovich.
Okay.
This summer, Rob Schneider's going to find out how hard being anti-vax is.
So, Josh, I got the stuff that is well documented. You were on the front lines for this. Please take us away with what's going on right now with the anti-vaccination movement.
So there will be some reoccurring players, and a particular couple deep dives on some people that you talked about. So to piggyback off of Ryan, before we start going down this road on Andrew Wakefield in particular, who I think we can all agree is the most well-known charlatan in the anti-vax movement, I want to discuss anti-vaccinations in the digital age. But before I do, there is something that I want to establish, and it's very important to me that we start off with this. There is a lot of information in the world today. It is a fundamental belief of mine that people should have access to this information as long as it is based on facts, science, and presented without bias as much as that can be true these days. And let's take another step back and be honest here, because the truth is, if you have a voice, you have a side. Very few things fall into this gray area, and specifically, there is very little gray area when it comes to medicine as far as what it does, because they wouldn't release it if they didn't know. It has to be approved, checks and balances. There is a very important distinction that I want to make here when it comes to this new age science involving vaccines and these online movements. The whole point of them is to acquire people to be part of a movement, a group, a party, whatever you want to call it, because it all originates with people asking questions. So let me say this very clearly, because this gets misconstrued or misrepresented all the time when it comes to vaccines. You are supposed to ask questions. There is nothing wrong with wanting to know more about something. It is in the very DNA of this show, and I'm sure the very DNA of most people.
Hell,
whether it be religion, what?
We did the research on this, and you can see where we landed probably, but yeah, I mean, we looked into it, we asked questions. There are things we didn't want to admit about vaccines at some point, but yes, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, Greg, I'm sure I have your full support here.
Yes.
Okay. So, religion, science, politics, whatever you want, it's normal and absolutely 100% okay to ask questions about things. The key difference being that the information you are getting needs to come from a trusted, reliable, and fact-based source, and that leads us back to bias. So I became full circle here, but I wanted to establish that. And I say all of this to shed some light on some organizations that have stood tall and rooted in this movement that vaccines are harmful. While many claim that vaccines outright are not the enemy, it is phrased many different ways, but it is all based in little to no science or fact. There is more to the agenda than simply vaccines for some organizations, but what they fight for most and tend to grandstand on is that vaccines are harmful to children. To what degree they are harmful depends on which groups you spotlight. Some say vaccines cause autism, others claim they don't do anything, or they are just money makers for the government or big pharma, and others simply claim that the New World Order, the globalists, overlords, whatever you want to call it.
The globalists, yeah, I was hoping the Jews would come up at some point. I tried to look into some of that stuff.
And oddly enough, there is a huge anti-vax movement inside the Jewish community itself, which I lightly touch on at points, but
that's something for the let's say alt-right would like to kind of deal with, because there's a lot of them. You know what? It's not that political. I'm just going to stop that. Let's cut that right there.
So these New World Order, globalists, overlords, whatever you want to call it, they're injecting data chips to control our mind, things like that. They want to control the population, right? Never mind. I was going to say something, but It is a spectrum of beliefs, and all need to have their time to shine. But here, I'll try to keep it relatively short for the sake of time, and to try to keep it as tame as possible.
Josh, before you get into that, can I just show exactly what you mean by it's been kind of turned into that sort of anti-globalist thing or anti?
Sure.
I took a few screenshots. I really wanted to hurt myself. I took out the cat of nine tails and just started flagellating myself with tweets by searching hashtag vaccines. And here's one.
Did you not have a good time? I'm guessing you didn't have a good time.
It's a lot of polls. Here's one from Candace Owens from Turning Points USA. Good friend of Ben Shapiro. If governments announced they created a coronavirus vaccine today, would you line up and get yours? Please retweet as I'm curious. 62,000 votes on this one, right? Of course, sign me up, got 26%. I'm not sure, got 33%. No chance in hell, got 41%. Here's another one. I'd rather die from COVID-19 if my king says my days are complete than take a vaccine made with DNA from cell lines from aborted babies. Do we really trust Yahweh, or do we put more faith in the good of science? That's a random person that probably doesn't want to be called out, and I will respect them, even though they have a very bad take. And lastly, our best friend, the person that it's fucking Jordan Sather, okay? He tweeted, would you get a coronavirus vaccine? Make me proud, with a little finger pointing downwards at the poll. I took this poll. Yes got 13%. No got 87%. Don't believe that this isn't an old controversy, because it's still going to be... This is a snapshot to the future. I'm sorry. Continue, Josh.
Well, so I wanted to cover some major players in the anti-vax movement with large organizations that spend money, time, and resources to fight for the, air quotes here, truth. So the first organization I'm going to cover is the Children's Health Defense. This is one of the most famous collectives headed by Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh boy.
There is so much to unpack with him, but to be brief and answer everyone's first question, yes, he is the nephew to former President John Fitzgerald Kennedy and son of former United States Senator Robert F. Kennedy. He is part of the Kennedy family. So directly from the Children's Health Defense website, I was able to gather their mission statement. It says, Children's Health Defense mission is to work tirelessly to end the childhood health epidemics by working to expose causes, eliminate harmful exposures, hold those responsible accountable, seek justice for those injured, and establish safeguards so it never happens to our children again. Children's Health Defense plans to initiate multiple legal initiatives in an effort to defend the health of our children and obtain justice for those already injured. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is their senior prosecuting attorney and chairman of the board. Mm-hmm. I just want to note here that I found it super fucking interesting that it wasn't senior legal advisor or legal defense team lead. No, the actual words out of his own mouth on their website is senior prosecuting attorney. This should give you some insight into how this foundation operates and how they plan to expose all of these atrocities these children endure due to vaccinations and other medical tribulations.
I like how you pulled the mad spouse term of, I just find it interesting that. But yes, I totally agree with you on that one.
So Children's Health Defense first establishes that our children right now are known as Generation Sick. We are in the midst of a chronic disease epidemic. I know, right? We are in the midst of a chronic disease epidemic where doctors and health officials are diagnosing kids born after 1990, and with what RF Kennedy and Children's Health Defense call crisis disease epidemic, and making this generation, the Generation Sick, the sickest generation in the history of the country. Their words, not mine. Yeah, their words, not mine. So the Children's Health Defense, or CHD, I will interchange both of them. It points to the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, saying in a study that one in every 6 American children have a developmental disorder such as autism, ADD, ADHD, or a learning disability. According to the HHS, which is the Human Health Services, 54% of American children have a chronic disease like rheumatoid arthritis or juvenile diabetes. Another claim is that our children are wandering around in what they call, quote, toxic soup, and we need to find whatever chemical or chemicals it is that is causing all of these problems. They ask questions like, why isn't the government asking the questions about what is debilitating our children? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. goes on to state that with the Children's Health Defense, he will continue to fight until his last breath with his boots on to bring these people or organizations to justice for causing so much harm and neglecting our children.
Well, I've been practicing meditating, so I didn't blow up on all those statements you just said, but I've been wanting to just contest that so hardly right now, but it's for later.
Well, I'm going to get into some of it right now. So some of the problems that come along with this organization, you talked about Mercury Moms, Ryan. Well, the Children's Health Defense was not their original name. The group was formerly known as the World Mercury Project. And I've been doing some digging, and I've been trying to find out why the shift in organizational title, but I haven't really been able to hammer down an answer. And that is something I'm going to continue to look for because I would love to know.
It's because of the singular use of the title. Like, it showed they were spot focused. They sound more professional with their new name.
And that's what I was trying to find a clear-cut answer of. But if I find something, I will definitely bring that to the table. Secondly, the big thing that the Children's Health Defense points to is vaccines containing deadly ingredients, particularly, Ryan?
Oh, are we going with thimerosal or aluminum right now?
Yeah. It's thimerosal.
Okay.
Mercury or thimerosal.
Yeah, so I'm not going to dig too much into that because we've talked about it. But just to reiterate, like Ryan said, most vaccinations do not contain thimerosal.
And there's nothing wrong with it either.
There's not.
As far as you know, I'm going with null hypothesis. There is no indication that there is anything wrong with thimerosal in vaccines.
The last and arguably biggest gripe is the rise in autism. So the numbers state that right now 1 in 59 children suffer from autism. That is as of 2018. That number in the year 2000 was 1 in 166. Now, to most people, this may be alarming. That is a pretty substantial jump in a very short amount of time. The problem with that statement, or not looking at that statement as the whole picture, is that there are more and more autistic kids. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. There are not more and more autistic kids. There are for their numbers, but in reality, they're not. The figures don't necessarily mean that there are more autistic children. The numbers are changing because there's increased awareness and education and changes in diagnostic criteria and a reduction in the stigma as more and more of the population falls under this autism umbrella. So it's not such a black and white thing. It's not a simple solution. There's more knowledge and information and data to back this up. So they're going to diagnose more people with autism because we know more about it now.
Let's look at it this way. I thought I was going to be saving some of this for part 2, but it was a very nice, concise way to say it. But a nice little thing is just like, it's not the fact that there are more autistic people in the world right now. There's more diagnoses of autistic people. Therefore, the numbers are going to shoot up if you have better criteria to diagnose them. Just like if you were to have a disease where there weren't any tests for it, the numbers would show pretty low for confirmed cases. And then eventually, once you have those tests, the cases will shoot up exponentially all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It's
fair. Very, very prevalent right now. I'll leave it at that. I will round this out by noting that this is a common theme amongst not only RFK Jr. and CHD, but with all groups that stray from vaccines. The answers are complicated. The science is complicated. There is no one-size-fits-all solution that answers every question. The data needs to be analyzed not as right or wrong, but on a scale. Seeing the whole picture is important, and groups like Kennedy Jr. and the CHD pounce on any chance they can to cause a confusion and chaos in families looking for answers. And that is one of the biggest problems I have with vaccines. And before I go on this huge rant on it, I am going to touch on it later, so I'm going to save it for the end. I will be moving on to the next major player, and that is the Informed Consent Action Network, also known as ICANN. And that was founded by television producer Del Bigtree in 2016 after he wrote and produced Vaxxed from Cover-Up to Catastrophe.
So
that was a movie.
So before you get any further, I thought that ICANN and CAN were the same thing. I didn't mention it, but there's another autism awareness group called Cure Autism Now. And
Yes.
that was, once again, another anti-vaccination group. And so it's CAN and ICAN.
Yes. Yes. Two separate groups. ICAN is a much bigger player, which I will get to shortly. So Vaxxed from Cover Up to Catastrophe, the movie, was directed by Andrew Wakefield. And I'm not going to spend any time covering this film because I'm going to be completely honest here. I did not watch it, and I'm not going to watch it.
Oh, dude, what if we did an awful good movies for Vaxxed?
Well, I was going to actually suggest that if maybe for some bonus content, or if people have enough, interest in what we have to say about it, like I wouldn't have a problem doing that, but I am not going to willingly watch this film. To say it is a misinformation campaign is a gross understatement. So Del Bigtree is the CEO of ICAN, making numerous unsubstantiated claims about an overzealous vaccine schedule that is harmful to children. Bigtree claims that there is evidence to back this up, but there has yet to be any real scientific evidence to back him up, to put it very lightly. And I want to point out what I first said about him being a television producer. He is not a doctor, a medical professional, or anything relevant in the court of law or medicine. He is a television producer who was a good face to attach to a movement after making a movie. This is not me shitting on him. These are just facts.
Yeah, that's fine.
But so ICAN has marketed themselves as not outright opposing vaccines, but rather it pushes for the parent to make the choice about their child getting vaccinations, i.e., not such a short time frame, things like that. Their mission statement from their website reads as follows. In a medical world manipulated by advertising and financial interests, true information is hard to find and often harder to understand. Our goal is to put the power of scientifically researched health information in your hands and to be bold and transparent in doing so, thereby enabling your medical decisions to come from tangible understanding, not medical coercion. So, while they are not directly denying vaccines or implying the causality of different effects, their litigation completely suggests the otherwise. More on that shortly. Bigtree, I wanted to pull one quote from him in particular, where he was overheard at a public speaking event saying, and this is him quoting, "They should be allowed to have measles if they want the measles. It's crazy that there's this level of intensity around a trivial childhood illness." The next thing I'm going to point out is I have a link in the show notes from the World Health Organization that states more than 140,000 people died from measles in 2018. I think we can all fucking agree that this is not some, quote, childhood illness.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people in the world, Josh. 140,000 isn't a whole lot. Fuck that. Never mind. Sorry. I couldn't hold it.
That's fine. Some other quick notes about ICAN. It is funded by two people in particular from the Sells Foundation. I have no idea if that's how it's said, but that's what I'm rolling with. Bernard and Lisa Sells. So they fund the majority of the money that goes to ICAN. They also were one of the big players in funding Vaxxed, the movie. And also of note is that I mentioned it's Bernard and Lisa Sells who are the money trail for this. Lisa is the president of ICAN, making them the largest funded anti-vax group to date.
Oh, I just love hearing that.
Yeah. So remember when I talked about some legal shits that they were doing? I'm going to get into that. As recent as this past March, ICAN was making the rounds, and so was Del Bigtree, about a huge win for the anti-vax movement and a huge win for ICAN. See, ICAN filed an FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act, which is a law requiring government entities to release certain information upon request, though it's very particular what information can be released. And ICAN filed this FOIA against the CDC, stating a very particular claim. And when I say a very particular claim, it was actually 6 claims. And 5 claims, all stating vaccines or various medicines given to children do not cause autism, as well as 1 claim, or rather, they wanted the information and the evidence that they rely upon, stating cumulative exposures to vaccines given over the first 6 months of a baby's life does not cause autism. So They filed this FOIA to the CDC, asking all of these things about whether particular vaccines cause autism, or basically their literature stating that vaccines in general don't cause autism over the first 6 months.
Ooh.
The CDC, oh, no, it gets fucking better. The CDC then responded with 20 fucking cases. I have the actual legal document in the show notes, and I recommend everyone checking it out. It is a maybe 45-second read. There's not much to it, and I'm going to tell you why. So after the CDC then provides these 20 cases, the document then goes to show an agreement between the CDC and ICANN stating that no further legal action is required, and both sides agree to squash it, dismissing the entire case. So pretty cut and dry, right? So if both sides agree to dismiss it, end of story. I mean, that makes sense. The CDC could have argued that they did not have to provide anything in the first place, but they actually just did. They gave 20 cases. And if they did continue to go down that path and not dismiss it, the court would have then had to make a ruling based off the information provided by both sides and determined whether vaccines do cause autism. But instead, the CDC said, fuck it, we'll just dismiss this case. So where is ICANN's victory? Well, after this agreement was reached and they decided to just forego any other legal matters, ICANN releases their own press statement saying that, the science was flawed, the CDC paid for their own results, and never minding the fact that in Del Bigtree's video on the fucking ICANN website, he explicitly states that they fund their own studies to find the truth. So the rules apply to one but not the fucking other. Also, that press release statement was an opinion piece, and they published it, they as in Bigtree and the ICANN, the company ICANN, criticizing the CDC, stating that none of their evidence disproves what they filed. And also, a verdict was never decided. So a verdict that was required to prove a negative. Now, we've gotten into the flawed science behind that, but basically because there was no verdict given, they won. That's what it boils down to. It is infuriating.
Well, a lot of people settle outside of court just to say they didn't lose a case.
And that is basically what happened. So because there was no formal ruling, ICANN said, well, the CDC can't say that vaccines don't cause autism because there's nothing that states that it does.
They can't can't do it regardless. And once again, big thing for next episode, but they can't do that anyway.
Bad science.
I was trying to not get too much into that, but yeah, like I said, we discussed proving a negative and how fun that is in the scientific world. So the last note that I wanted to mention is that Bigtree hosts many online streams in which he partners up with RFK Jr.
God damn it.
And nobody is surprised. Now let's move on to the last major player. This, to me, is the one that hit hardest for me personally. And the last group I'm going to cover is a Facebook group. It is called Stop Mandatory Vaccinations. And that is headed by Larry Cook. And Larry Cook was my first exposure into the anti-vax movement as far as a really fleshed out deep dive into what this whole thing was about. Larry Cook is the founder, and he runs this Facebook group, and I first heard about this group when I saw a news story about a young boy who was 4 years old in Colorado dying from the flu. And this is a complete tragedy. I want to establish that first off. I'm not using this to prove a point. I'm just telling the story. And the devil's in the details, and it's even worse than you can imagine. So the boy's mother consulted Stop Mandatory Vaccinations, the group on Facebook, and asked advice about the medicine the boy's doctor prescribed, Tamiflu. Now, her son had a seizure and was running a fever, but had not been formally diagnosed with the flu itself yet. 2 of the 4 children inside the household had been diagnosed with the flu, which is why the doctor prescribed Tamiflu for the whole entire family. The woman even wrote, quote, "The doctor prescribed Tamiflu, but I did not pick it up." And I want to be fair here with Tamiflu. It's probably the most common medicine that is diagnosed or prescribed by doctors for dealing with the flu, and the side effects are not great. This isn't just some anti-vax thing. It's pretty universally known. There's some other really great medicines that are coming forward for dealing with the flu. I actually took it within the last month, and like it helped me out tremendously. Sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but anyway,
great
that's
endorsement.
Not the point. Yeah, sorry. But instead of Tamiflu, stop mandatory vaccinations, the group suggested using things like elderberry or thyme or breast milk and other natural remedies.
Italian food?
So none of these were effective, and the child was hospitalized and passed away. So shortly after this news broke, the post was promptly deleted from the Facebook group. Unfortunately, this is just one of the many examples of bad advice given to people from this group, spearheaded by Larry Cook. And I'm sure, as most of you could have guessed, Larry Cook is a naturopath who describes himself as a, quote, healthy lifestyle advocate.
I hate
He was a sound technician by trade and ended up becoming the executive director of the California Naturopathic Doctors Association. This was done and accomplished by him using social media platforms to promote conspiracy theories such as Big Pharma's just trying to take your money, and also effective ways to treat autism. He has zero medical background. Also, pointing out here the obvious, but dude went from healthy lifestyle advocate straight into autism controversy. I don't know where that fucking chain of events happened or why it happened so quickly, but he went from one extreme to the other.
You can't see me like making the cash movement with my hands, but
oh no. So Cook launched a website that is filled with unsubstantiated and incorrect scientific claims about toxins and gastrointestinal issues. Sound familiar to anyone?
Yeah.
So Cook is the founding father of promoting listening to strangers on the internet over advice of medical professionals. He is a grifter to the fullest extent, and probably the only person that's in this entire series that I hate more than Andrew Wakefield. I'm not trying to punch down, but this guy absolutely makes my blood boil. Let me explain why. So he makes a living off of seducing angry and devastated parents who have just lost a child to particularly SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome, or accidental asphyxiation. It is a terrible thing, both of them, that happen. It's unfortunate. Some of it is an accident. Some of it just happens. You don't have any control over it. But he specifically targets those families, and he instead preaches and persuades them to pivot to vaccines being the causality of their problems. And one way he does this is by buying Facebook ads. So much so that he was recognized as one of the leading buyers of anti-vax vaccine Facebook advertising from December 2018 to February 2019.
Son of a bitch.
He would buy ads to target women 25 years or older in areas where measles outbreaks have occurred to get parents to fight stricter laws on vaccine regulations. Does anyone want to take a guess who the other major player buying ads was? Because if your guess was the Children's Health Defense, you are correct. Thank you, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr.
Oh, God damn it. Okay.
Stop Mandatory Vaccines is also one of the 3 leading sources of false information shared on the internet, along with, you guessed it, Children's Health Defense. Thank you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Thankfully, YouTube, Facebook, and other outlets have made attempts or actually stopped accepting his money, or preventing ads from appearing on his content that monetizes it. I do need to mention that Facebook still does have anti-vax ads despite their claims, and people have just stopped publishing blatant misinformation about it. So they use these really cool, I'm going to call them buzzwords, such as vaccine controversy or alternative cures. And these buzzwords kill about 160,000 people a year. So thanks, Mark Zuckerberg.
I'd like to say this. We have had recurring themes here at Rumor Flies. We do a episode every now and then for a season that's about, different social media stories that you see. And then with the Q episode that we did, and Jordan Sather even being anti-vax now, and now we're doing the whole anti-vax movement, I would just say that I want to talk about our new sponsor. Facebook is the leading social media. Okay. Seriously, guys, though, we have a really big problem with Facebook. I'm going to say it straight up.
But where did Larry Cook get this money in the first place? Well, it's the same place that we all get all of our medical bills covered in this country. GoFundMe. So these ads promoted him and his materials and merchandise, such as books, t-shirts, things like that, and also memberships. If there's a way to sell it, he does it. And the Daily Beast actually pressed him. I mean, and look, I understand the Daily Beast isn't a fucking beacon of light and everything, but they actually pressed him on where his money from his GoFundMe campaign went, and he straight up admitted to them that it goes directly into his bank account, and he sometimes uses it to pay his own bills.
So, yeah, make sure to buy those I Didn't Get Poison Poke shirts if you can. Coffee mugs, shower curtains, whatever you want. Did you guys know we have a Threadless?
Thankfully, GoFundMe suspended his account and no longer lets him collect any money there.
Yay!
So, Cook and Stop Mandatory Vaccinations is a place full of lies and misinformation, much like other groups covered here. None of these groups are better or worse than the other, but my bone in particular that I picked with Stop Mandatory Vaccinations is that Cook doesn't hide what he's doing and is even open about where he gets the funding. It's not because of his last name, a la Robert Kennedy Jr., or it's not some hedge fund portfolio like ICANN that provides it. It's everyday people who have lost a child due to some terrible, horrific accident. He makes money off of them. He is a fucking grifter to the fullest letter of the law. While most people see grief and loss, all Cook sees is fucking dollar signs.
Remember how I talked about when my dad died? It turns out that the funeral home director that I had coordinated with ended up being my financial advisor. And
yes.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking, except it's 1,000 times worse.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm rounding it out here, but so there were some more figureheads and groups that I really wanted to cover. I actually had more on the list, but I ended up cutting that because I know this is getting kind of long. And I also feel like this is a really good landing spot without taking up too much more of your time. There are still some major players out there who have an impact on the anti-vax movement and play a role in this misinformation campaign. I know I'm already going long here, but I wanted to leave with a last little nugget or two before I go, or before we move on to Greg's topic. And this is not about the cost of life, but actually about the life of cost. A year ago, there was a massive measles outbreak in Washington state. There were 87 confirmed cases. In order to figure out who might have been put at risk, the state health department interviewed over 4,600 people and closely monitored almost 1,000 of them. It reassigned staff from across its divisions, borrowed public health workers from other states, sent people who would normally be at desks into the field, performed hundreds of lab tests that would not normally be necessary. The final number of taxpayer dollars spent on these 87 confirmed cases was $1.6 million.
Wow.
Another example is New York in October of 2018 to July 2019, when there were more than 600 measles cases. In refining the outbreak, 35 of the 37 children who tested positive had not received the MMR vaccine. This particular neighborhood, where most of the children lived, were targeted by anti-vaccine groups. This outbreak cost the city somewhere in the neighborhood of $8.4 million.
Jesus Christ.
These are just two of the numerous instances where these episodes could have been prevented. Children would still be alive today, and that money could have been spent elsewhere. They could have allocated that money for literally anything else.
Yeah.
My last thought is just imagine a much bigger outbreak that could spread rapidly, how much money that would cost the government. And I'm going to leave you with that.
Could not imagine that. That's ridiculous. So thank you, Josh, for informing us and not ruining my night whatsoever. Thank you.
I'm glad I was able to get this off my chest. I put a lot of legwork into this, and like I was visibly shaken and upset from doing all of this, but like I want people to know what these people out there are doing, and the cost of what they're doing is people and children.
Yeah.
And
I had a pretty hard time researching this shit, but I can't imagine having a kid and researching this shit. You guys are troopers.
So anyway, before I get emotional, Greg, why don't you do your dance, buddy?
So my topic was less of like a topic and more of fostering kind of a discussion here, right? Give us some jumping off points to talk about two things that really stood out to me, which are what are the lessons we've learned kind of like as far as messaging, as far as what this means, as far as the movement, and what are some of the ways we can actually move forward? How can we have communication? How can we convey messages? So I wanted to kind of run through some of the lessons I wrote down. A lot of this came from Bad Advice by Dr. Offit, really interesting book. The guy has a very interesting career of making blunders on television and learning from them.
Yeah, it's really fun when doctors get death threats, right?
It's just peachy. So basically, we all need to know that these are parents that are worried about their children. And I think a lot of us lose that empathy, right? Whether you have a child or not, it's not hard to imagine that, like, if you find out about any sort of diagnosis that is quote unquote atypical or whatever you want to use, right? There's a lot of controversy around that, but it's difficult. It's hard to accept. Your vision of what you're going to be as a parent and the thing your kid is going to do, whatever, is now suddenly altered and challenged. And I think this is the core emotional response that the anti-vax movement is really thriving on, especially because people are just searching for answers. They want to believe there's some reason. When a doctor says, there's nothing we can do, I'm sorry, autism just isn't understood enough, there's no cures or clear reasons for people having autism, many are just hearing, I don't care about your child and I have no solutions for you and I'm not going to try anything. Then someone like Wakefield walks in with an easy answer, or Oprah goes on the air and says, your doctor is wrong and hurting your child. These clear, simple answers are just attractive. And we want to believe we can make sense of it. We want to have a roadmap for success. You know, you find out your kid has autism, you find out your kid has any sort of debilitating disorder or whatever, and you go, well, what do we do from here? How do we make them better? And as much as we want to like bag on people, I think you two did a great job. It's not condescending or talking down. It's just looking at a flawed movement and pointing out how uncredentialed these people are. But it's so hard to fight that desire for a clear answer and that sensation of, oh, a doctor who finally cares about us and I'm not just numbers on a chart, right? So I just think we need to express empathy for these people. And I don't know. I know that was kind of ranty, but I think that's kind of an important thing that as we move forward to keep in mind.
Once again, just the same reason for, the whole QAnon movement. It's people being grifted for somebody else's sole gain. And it is infuriating. And then there are the people that have been even elevated to leaders of the movement when they are coming from a place of true understanding. But it's the idea of the availability cascade. When you're surrounded by people who only have those same opinions, it makes you even more steadfast in resisting any sort of evidence that will contradict what you believe, regardless of how solid it is.
And the problem
it's
is
an echo chamber.
Yep. Absolutely. And the problem is when we allow groups and celebrities and media to fan the fire of anti-vaccination, we wind up with people calling their kids, quote, damaged by mercury and, quote, vaccine damaged. They parade their kids around with shirts that say these things. Dr. Offit writes about it in his book. And to me, it's just sad to think that parents are calling their kids damaged, that they see autism as their kid being broken. Let's get beyond the fact that it's just ableist and wrong. But millions around the world are living great lives that are on the autism spectrum. It's just baffling to me that they then turn around and take, or rather deploy, Westboro Baptist Church style protesting and have their kids parading around, literally telling everybody, look at my screwed up kid. They're choosing to say that. I don't know, man. It's gross to me.
There's the whole thing of parents of children. They don't usually, if you have an autistic child, you don't get, oh my God, it's so cute, look at the little smile. It's more of just like, oh, the parent doesn't get, smiles or laughs whenever a kid asks why an obese woman on the subway is so fat, or is just trying to have a fit in the middle of the street, or having something like just any of the different quirks that somebody with autism can have that aren't generally just like oh, look at a little child, he's just acting up a little bit, or it's actually kind of cute. This is stuff that is very affecting their lives forever, as long as their kid's alive and as long as they're alive. So it's something where it can definitely foment some anger, because you have your idea of the perfect thing of getting married and raising kids in some people's minds shattered by the fact that that kid is abnormal by most standards, So you're going to be angry.
Yeah,
absolutely. I agree. And it's something too that I think, like, you realize when you have a kid, it's like, oh shit, I got to take care of this thing or it's going to die and I'm going to jail. Or, there's probably other things you think of too, but that is one thought. I can vouch for that. But it's one thing to sit there and say, okay, I got to take care of this kid. And eventually, you're going to be able to teach the kid to be self-sufficient and be on their own. And, he can cook his own breakfast or she can dress herself or whatever it may be. And then, but when you get an autistic kid or a child with autism, I should say, and if it's a very severe case, that child will never be able to be on their own. So now that becomes a burden they have to bear because they know that they're not going to be around forever. And so then they're going to have to find another caretaker and things like that. And that's just a lot of things I've seen echoed in the community of parents of a child with severe autism, that they can't take care of themselves and they're not always going to be able because they're going to get older and they don't know what to do. And it's a real fear to have. And I totally sympathize with that.
Yeah. And luckily today, like, as much as we see the anti-vax movement growing and the hate that comes out of it, the ableist stuff, and even, as you said, Ryan, threatening doctors and making them, want to stay on the sidelines. Dr. Offit talks about having to have a security guard follow him around during a conference because of a death threat he got. And,
wow.
He could have easily just not done it. He could have easily just not take anything into account, but he had to call the FBI because someone said the city his daughter was from in a threatening email. And his daughter was in. Them. Yeah. There was some really terrible stuff going on. And luckily it's flipped a lot today though, because as you both talked about, there's all these documentaries that came out, in the 1980s with, DTP or DPT, right?
Yeah. Vaccine roulette.
All these films that came out, and the media attention now has drastically diminished. The anti-vax movement is not given nearly as much mainstream media validation as it used to. I mean, you have people like Katie Couric doing stuff. I think it's really hard to explain how much worse it was, even though it's still a huge problem, as far as their ability to amplify that people just were not throwing them out the window as a nonsense idea. So what's interesting now is you have mainstream media and celebrities supporting vaccines, right? So even Kim Kardashian, I found out, is a passionate pro-vaccine advocate.
Really? I did not know that.
I did not know that either. Maybe, I don't know how passionate, but she specifically came up as vocal about vaccinating kids.
Huh.
So there you go, right?
Blame the media a little bit. We said
exactly.
if it bleeds, it leads. And in this specific case, if it dies, it flies.
Yeah. So I kind of have two questions I want to take us out with, if that's all right.
Sure.
So there was two things that he brought up. One was a solution. The other, I think, is just an interesting question that I kind of disagreed with his answer on. And I'd be curious what y'all's answers are. So the first one is, the sad reality is we often associate bad news with the source, a shoot the messenger problem, right? So what do we do about it? And one of the solutions he proposed is messaging matters. After Challenger, NASA aggressively had their marketing team working with Hollywood. So movies like Armageddon, Apollo 13, Space Cowboys, all these things came out with NASA at the center as heroes, right? They needed to spin public opinion. And there seems to be a lot of theory saying that something like that really is attractive and it does make a big difference in the public mind. I mean, think about it. When have you ever seen NASA portrayed as evil? Ever?
Yeah.
Every government body in the U.S. is portrayed as no, you know what I'm saying? In every major movie, every government agency is at some point portrayed as evil or corrupt or horrible, but NASA is the angel of government bureaucracy. And
it's because the mainstream media. We know the moon landing didn't happen.
But the point being that he argues that they took control of their PR and did a masterful job. Same with the weather service with Twister, apparently. They made sure he said these groups made sure they were part of the conversation, that if they heard a sci-fi movie was happening, that they came in and consulted, right? To make things accurate and to show NASA. So it's just interesting saying get in the conversation is huge. What do y'all think about that? I mean, do you think doctors need to be more aggressively vocal? Do you think there could be some sort of advocacy or something, or control of the media narrative that could really push back harder on the anti-vax movement?
I think we need a new Bill Nye, essentially. I think we need somebody young. Yeah. We need somebody that is charismatic, but also speaks the truth, because there are famous doctors. There's Dr. Oz. So, I mean, it's not like it's not viable. It can totally happen. There's quote unquote Dr. Phil. We just need one on the right side. And the problem is it's kind of hard to give a stance that hammers in you as the hero when it's generally accepted by a lot of people, most of the time people get famous for being controversial. And saying something like vaccines can save kids' lives shouldn't be controversial, and for the most part isn't to a good bit of people. So it's just kind of like having a hero that just says brush your teeth every day. It's weird, like people like to converse. They like to at least hear about the flip side that, oh, maybe they do know something because everybody else is rejecting them. Wakefield does that all the time. He said that all the doctors that rejected his papers or said that they couldn't reproduce his stuff were just trying to save face and their reputation. We're going to get more into Wakefield once again, but if they can find a clever way to do it, yeah, I think elevating doctors is a very great thing to do because, I really don't need to say why.
I agree. And just fun fact, I wanted to point this out. Dale Bigtree was a field producer for Dr. Phil, so...
fucking lovely.
So yeah, there's that. Also, so to kind of put a recent spin on this, a very topical thing, like people love Fauci. People believe Fauci. Like when he says something, people are much more inclined to believe him because he seems like a very genuine person who is working his ass off to make things better right now.
Yeah, and guess who got his security regiment upped recently?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, look, it's not a perfect world. I think Bill Nye is a really good pull, Ryan. But yeah, I think we would do better to really emphasize this work in particular, not just, a nuclear physicist or a doctor of, brain surgery or things like that. Like, let's see what happens.
Yeah. So, Greg, what's your other question?
My other question is it worth debating? And his argument is that if I'm sitting across from Andrew Wakefield, I'm never going to convince Andrew Wakefield. Let me say that again. I'm never going to convince Andrew Wakefield. But it's not about Andrew Wakefield. And he uses the Bill Nye and I can't remember his name debate, the creationist, as an example where he's like, you're not doing it for the other person, you're doing it for the observers. In a lot of ways, it kind of simulates a potential philosophy for getting in arguments on the internet, right? Some people say that it's pointless internet fights, they don't do anything, and others argue that it's not about the person you're debating, it's about the other people reading and seeing pushback.
It's about the people in the peripherals.
Yeah, and his argument is, therefore, Bill Nye did get some heat, but he thinks it was right of Bill Nye to do it.
Yeah.
You don't agree with that?
Well, I'm curious what y'all think.
I think it's good. Okay, so I will say on one side, the Oliver Wendell Holmes argument that I did was the irregular understands the hydrostatic paradox of controversy, that it raises the meanest dispute into a seeming level with his antagonist. So yes, that's more aligning with you, Greg. And also, I will say, I love watching internet blood sport debates on Twitch. I have never had a situation where it's convinced me to one side or the other of like something that I wasn't already agreeing with. However, I'm pretty steadfast in my opinions when I watch those debates. This is about getting the people that are on a tightrope and can fall to either side. This is about tipping that over with a simple thing of just doing a nice systematic breakdown. You're not going to get anybody out that's dug themselves 60 feet down in the ground. You're trying to stop the people that are deciding to go check out what's in that hole. I
get you.
I think that's what helps. And it's great if you can pull some people out along the way, but I still think it's worth doing because, if you're not debating them, they have free range.
Right. And
look at what we're doing right now.
And I was actually going to bring that up. So look at it this way. If nobody sits there and has the conversation, I'm not going to say debate, I'll say conversation, no matter what side you're on, if nobody has the conversation ever, then the information is not out there. Nobody can see it. It's not optical. It's not visible.
Nothing is a given.
Right. So I understand from that perspective. I also do understand that, like, I'm never going to win an argument against Andrew Wakefield. No matter what I say or do, he's going to hold steadfast in his opinions. So I do agree. I like that response a lot because I'm not arguing with Wakefield for the sake of trying to change Wakefield.
You're never going to get him to concede to an argument. You might win it, but that doesn't mean you win the public opinion.
No, I think as long as my information, like I mentioned at the top of my topic, was as long as it's rooted in facts, data, science, and I'm not being, a little shit about it, I think that, somebody somewhere will see it and maybe they'll absorb it, or maybe they'll ask some more questions, or maybe they'll be like, well, that's a good point, or he's a dickhead, I'm not going to listen to him. All are fair points.
Yeah, and I guess like a little Greg, do you have anything else right quick?
I was just going to say that I basically agree with y'all. I think that it's as important for the people looking on. I think that if you aren't pushing back or no one's pushing back, then people take too many things at face value.
Right. One last thing that I kind of want to end on is I was trying to get into this whole public perception thing of how do you bring somebody over to your side. And really, it was a lot of Gen X and their parents that were the ones that have, and now millennials too, unfortunately, that have been so anti-vax. And Paul Offit had an interesting outlook on this of how to convince somebody, like how to convince this generation of people to come back. And it's have their parents talk to them. Usually, the kids, we don't know anything about this because we're the kids. We're never going to convince our parents of too much by acting like we know more science than them or we're more experienced with this or more knowledgeable. Usually it doesn't work. But he was saying that the grandparents of our generation right now, some of them have gone through the polio epidemic. So they saw a pandemic firsthand. And I wrote this down about a couple of weeks ago, 6 months. It was one of the first notes I wrote down that really hammered in. I was like, wow, that's a very good point. I love it. It shows that some people that have gone through this and can see what a vaccination can do to stop something. I need to throw that note out the fucking window now. I don't know. It's really fucking dark. But I am still very hopeful that we're going to come out of this okay with vaccinations continuing to really make the world a better place. And please just don't hand wave somebody off if they're anti-vax. Try to bring them over. Because ultimately, if you hand wave them off, that's almost like saying, I don't care if your child dies. And maybe you don't.
Yeah,
it's a moral
like I
thing.
said earlier,
this is a moral thing.
Earlier, it's such a like not having good answers and shoot the messenger stuff. I mean, you gotta be gentle, unfortunately.
Greg, do you want to take us out until part 2, where we will be covering the science in depth and it will not be nearly as dark?
Sure. Before we do real quick, though, I'd love to really quick do a shameless plug for my new podcast I just released.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so my sister and I and our friend and colleague, Barry Schwartz, we launched a podcast called We'll Be Right Back, The Future of Hospitality. We are interviewing business owners and individuals in the service industry here, the hospitality industry, about how we're moving forward, talking about policy, talking about the ways they're pivoting their businesses. It's been really cool. By the time this episode comes out, actually it's the same day, my interview with one of the co-owners of La Cosanita goes up. That's gonna be really fun. So anyway, please check it out. Yes.
What is La Cosanita? So people know.
That's right. It's a delicious food truck here and in Chicago. And they are a wonderful organization and are doing really interesting work. So please check out the show, share, like, review, all that good stuff. But your first love, Rumor Flies, it can be found at Rumor Flies on social media, facebook.com/rumorflies, rumorfliespodcast.com for everything. You can also check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/rumorflies, where you can donate. Reminder, we are not charging for that currently. We are going to give y'all a freebie for the rest of the season. There will be a little reduced content because of that, but we will still have awesome stuff coming out for y'all as per usual.
Yep.
Threadless, we have an awesome Threadless page. Go buy some stuff, please. Check out our awesome merchandise, and that is in the show notes.
All right. For this half of an episode, I am Ryan.
If we're going to call this a half, I don't know what we're going to call the full one. I am Josh.
It's part 1 and part 2.
There we go.
And I'm Greg.
Bye, guys.
Bye.